This is what I wanted to talk about, is how to like raise your prices. So about an hour and a half ago, I put out a question to people asking if they had any questions about pricing their puppets. Now, what I'm just going to do is give some advice that's worked well for me and some recommendations that I think will work for other people as well, and maybe a similar situation, or maybe even if your situation is different. One thing I will say is if you disagree with something, that's okay. But I would hope that you disagree in a way, and you comment down below in a way that furthers the conversation, and then I'd love to talk about it as well. So, so one of the first questions that I had was, how do you figure out what your time is worth as a puppet builder? Is it based on experience? So there's a couple different ways to talk about that. I think experience can be a big factor about it. As well as just even because one of the biggest mistakes I see a lot of new puppet builders do is they sometimes overvalue their time. And now that's where the debate kind of gets sticky, because people are such sticklers on what their time is worth. And the hard thing is, like, there's so many jobs in the world that are paid hourly. Like if you worked at any fast food restaurant, but for that is whether you're busy or whether you're slow, you get the same amount of money, you know? And as a builder, you know, you are an artist, and you got to think about, you know, if something takes too long, is that because of your skill level, or is that because you're spending more time on it to make it like more intricate, you know? So that's where the skill comes into play as well, because, you know, a big thing that's talked about is graphic design, you know? Like if you think about, if you hand over a design, and they ask how many hours did you put into it, you know, in a way, like where is the value to them? Is it in the hours you spent, or is it in the final product, you know? So those are some things to think about. Especially sometimes a client wants something done really fast, you know? And again, using graphic design as an example, if they have it done the next day, you know, in a way, that's saving that company a lot of time and money rather than just waiting. So those are things to think about. Now, I know graphic design is very different than puppet building, because at the end of the day, you know, there is that kind of, depending on the design, that golden amount. You know, if someone only spent 3 hours on a puppet, you know, how good is it really, you know? But then again, if it's just a regular kind of simple hand puppet, and then they say they put 100 hours into it, and it's not anything too fancy, you know, you question the skill level. So, you know, that's something you only figure out by making more puppets. Okay? You know, if you're still questioning how long a puppet should take to make, based on looking at a design, by looking at a design, you should have a good idea of how long it'll take you for your skill level. And if you don't know the answer to that question yet, that means you need to build more puppets for yourself. You need to practice more building puppets. That's very important. So, but again, one of the biggest mistakes I see people do is overvalue their puppets when they're new, because again, let's say they put 40 hours on it, and it's obviously kind of a, you know, a beginner level builder. So I wouldn't put that the same as someone who's more experienced just because of the amount of hours. So, you know, a good way to find out what you're worth is what I call the eBay test, you know. It doesn't always work, and you know, and that's why if you sell a handful of them on eBay, you can kind of find that middle ground of what to charge for a certain type and style of puppet. You know, because at the end of the day, anything is only worth what someone will pay for it, regardless of how much time you put into it. So that's a good way to let it pass the sniff test, okay, if I do say so. So again, this is especially talking from a beginner's puppet standpoint, because you got to really question your skill level for that, okay? So if you have any more questions about that, let me know down below. How do you price your work? How do I price my work? Well, a couple months ago on the Puppeteers podcast Facebook page, we posted a graphic. I'm going to put it up right now. A graphic of kind of a good baseline for, I would say, an advanced independent puppet builder, someone who has a lot of experience, someone who's been doing it for a long time with some big clients too. And I think this is a good level for that. But then again, if you're a big company, you know, like some of those bigger companies that work for some big top things, you know, add 10 grand to this price. So, but again, if you're an independent, tons of experience, and again, this is for every single puppet that we talk about in this, it is completely dependent as well on the design. So, because like if something's a mech puppet or a live hand puppet or a costume puppet, those are all going to have different prices as well, which kind of gets into, actually, I'll jump to that question now. Someone asked, do puppet styles change what you charge? Absolutely. Okay, from many standpoints, from the ones we just talked about. You know, if it's a hand puppet, it's going to take a lot less material and a lot less time than a walk around puppet. So I think those are some of the more obvious things. But even like the difference between a rod puppet and a live hand puppet, like, is there a different price? There can be in time, because again, depending on the design, a live hand puppet I could probably crank out a little faster than a rodded puppet, because I don't have to worry about all the time to make the arm rods, to do the armature fingers and things like that. It can take a little less time, okay? Again, if it's a simple design. But then again, if they have, in that live hand puppet, if they want all these patches or spots or stripes, those are all hand stitched in, because then maybe that makes the design of the sack puppet more expensive than a simple one-colored rod puppet. So again, the design is key to the pricing of just about any puppet. But to go back to that other question about how I price my puppets, there's another little thing that a lot of people don't always talk about, is it depends on the client a little bit, which almost sounds dirty and not fair, but it's the truth. You know, how something is used affects the price of something. And that's, again, in every art form. You know, if someone's doing a graphic design logo for, a mom and pop ice cream shop around the corner, it's going to be a very different price than someone designing a simple logo for a huge company, And a perfect example is something like Nike. Look at how simple that design is. It's a check mark, okay? But that design, first of all, they probably paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars for that little design. But then again, they used it as a tool to make millions, probably billions and billions of dollars. So that's a big factor too, So if this is for a commercial, it's going to have a different rate than it's maybe for an independent film, to an extent, that looking at the potential of what something is worth, okay? For an independent film, maybe, it's a student film, you got to charge them for your time, so it's going to be expensive, especially from the perspective of an indie filmmaker. But again, it's not like it's going to be something that they're going to keep necessarily making income from. But actually, maybe that's wrong. Maybe they have plans to make it into a series or something. And maybe when you're negotiating, that can be in the terms of what you're negotiating. So, like, in these terms, used in this project, this is the rate. But if it was to get picked up as a series, there's two things I might ask for. Sometimes if they want to be picked up into a series, they might want to rebuild, and they might have more money and backing and want a nicer puppet. I would ask for the right of first refusal. So that means they have to come to you first to build the puppet. And if you say yes, then you have the job. If you say no, then they can find somebody else. So that kind of locks you in. That's a good thing to have. But again, that's a very good thing to do that, to lock them in with the film. And again, yeah, if it gets picked up by a TV station or something, then maybe that's reasons to renegotiate. So that's where I was. So opening up terms to renegotiate based on future projects with this character is a way you could do it, okay? But I think maybe even talking about that might scare some people who are listening to this, because they might be like, oh, sometimes all this kind of jargon talk is scary to a client. And sometimes it is. But I think based on always research your client, and sometimes you're lucky and there's a lot of information about them, about their past work. And sometimes you're not lucky, and there's not a lot of information about their past work. So you kind of have to make a judgment call and tiptoe around it. If it gives you a good feeling, sometimes take the risk. If it doesn't, then don't. Trust your gut. I've taken chances. And again, I trust my gut pretty well. I've only been burnt like once or twice. but and sometimes I put myself out there, and it turned into something really great and more opportunities in the future. So those are things to think about. So again, then I was talking about if it's a commercial versus if it's a film. And also think about, like if it's theater, and what level of theater it is. So if a local theater company to Buffalo, where I am now, asks me about a puppet, especially I work with a local theater group, the Theater of Youth. I don't even think they realize how good of a deal they get. They get a great deal. Because I know they're a little theater company that's struggling themselves, but so I give them a great deal. I don't completely rake myself over the coals. I try to make sure I'm taken care of, but there's I think it depends on what you value. I value helping out my local community, especially my local theater community, the most I can, while still taking care of myself. But especially for myself as a teacher, like I know I built a bunch of puppets for Stella Luna, a beautiful book about bats that was turned into a stage show for a local theater group. And I'm a teacher during the day. All my students got to go to the theater and see these puppets that their teacher made, which I thought was pretty cool, because especially as an art teacher, there's that famous old saying that those who cannot do teach. So I think it's important if you are a doer for your students to see that, like, hey, art isn't just something for our other teachers can take a break. It actually has some use in the world. So that's part of why I do it. But again, if this is a theater company like somewhere where I have no personal connection to, not that I don't want to help them, but like you can't help everybody, and like if I can see that contribution locally, I'm definitely more likely to help out. So again, pick your battles there too. And if you're not in a financial position to do that, don't. If I was completely not in a financial position to help them out, I wouldn't, because I couldn't. But I was able to, so I gave them a great deal, and I gave them a break. So that's another little tip for pricing some stuff for a local level too. And that also goes for if someone, sometimes people call me. This is the worst thing. I've got this idea for a show, and like, but I don't have a lot of money. Can you help me out? Now that's a tricky one. Okay, now you really got to trust your gut. Okay, because as far as I'm concerned, an idea is worth nothing. Okay, unfortunately, it's not. And the proof I have for that is the shake weight. Okay, that's a bad idea, but guess what? It made a millionaire somewhere. Okay, so even taking a bad idea and running with it, the shake weight is proof that can work. So you also have to be able to run with it, because some people have a good idea and then they just can't run with it. So I really have to believe that this person is going to have follow through. Okay. And part of how I believe that is, again, looking at their past work. I look them up. And if they don't have much content, I ask them, I said, like, show me some of your work, because like, if I'm even going to consider cutting you a deal, I want to make sure my work is going to be presented, my puppets that I'm building, that you are going to present them on film or in theater in a way that is going to make me look good, because there's some value in that as well. Okay, so so the next thing we have here, the person asked about, do you ever have any conditions of exclusivity of a design? Okay, now that depends on a couple things. First of all, it depends on who designs it. If someone calls me and says, we want you to design a puppet, then definitely that's going to be part of the conversation. But if they did a sketch and they sent it to me, I don't really bring it up, because it's their design. I'm building their design. So, a design cost is a separate cost. It can, if they have their own design, that can be a major savings for them, because it just, believe it or not, it depends. Some people love designing. Some people don't really like designing as much. They just want to build. I like both. I like to design, but sometimes it's fun to not design, especially if a client's picky and they're like, oh, well, change this, change that. No, if it's their design, then there's like, it's like following directions, you know. It's like you can't really make a mistake because you're just doing what they said. So less for interpretation, which is great. So to expand on that question, they said, you know, so let's say you did a design, you designed it for them, and then they want to make sure that that character is exclusive and you never build it again for anybody. Okay. Yeah, that would be, an upcharge as well. Because even for myself, for my eBay puppets, you know, I own those designs. The people who buy them, though, I let them use the designs with no restrictions. So they can make merch of it, they can take pictures of it, put it on a t-shirt, they can do anything they want. But at the end of the day, if I wanted to make a double of it, and for myself, for whatever reason, I could do that because it is my design. They just have full use of it. That's something that I decided to do, okay? And you might not want that. So, again, that's something you have to decide for you. That's what I decided, and I found that seems very fair. I've never replicated one. I have no desire to, but if for any reason I wanted to, I'm able to because, again, it's my design, and they just have full use of it, okay? It's not exclusive. It's exclusive to them as long as I don't make another one and sell it, you know? So that's what I do. And just to be clear, too, like, that's just to give myself protection. I would never use that as, like, a strong-arming somebody for something. And if you do, that would be not a very ethical thing to do as a business person. So it's just a little way to give yourself some protection. So let's see here. They asked, what would you charge for the exclusivity? Again, that depends on the scale of the project as well, what it's going to be used for, how much return they would expect to get from it. Because one thing I generally, the first thing I ask somebody, if they're asking me for a puppet, is what their budget is for the project. You know, and depending on, I can gauge how they answer that because sometimes they interpret that differently. The way I ask it is really, what's the budget of the entire project? You know, if this is a full theater production, they probably have like a $20,000 budget, but that covers their sets, their costumes, their everything. So that gives me an idea of how much room there is to work with and how much I can do for them. You know, because let's say if they say, hey, we have $1,000 for a puppet. You know, I can make $1,000 puppet. I can make a $5 puppet. They're going to look pretty different, okay? I can make a $5 puppet, a $1,000 puppet, and a $10,000 puppet. And they're going to look very different based on the amount of time I can put into it, the amount of material, and so on. So I think you guys should be able to get a good idea of that. We have just a few more questions here. Do you sell the rights to your patterns or designs? So I think we kind of talked about the design element of that, but the patterns is interesting too. You know, because that's another thing that can factor big into the price of a puppet. So if someone wanted to order a puppet from me based off of a pattern that I've made in the past, that's going to be much more inexpensive than me creating a brand new pattern. Because the pattern making process takes so much time. Sometimes that can be half of the cost of a puppet is just developing a brand new pattern. Because I got to sculpt it, I got to trace that pattern, I got to scale it correctly, and sometimes that takes a couple times to do. You know, so again, if it's a puppet that I've made before, but they just want a different take on it, some different features, some different fur, some different colors, that can be much more inexpensive. And I've done that for people. I even say, they say, hey, we want a puppet kind of like this. And I say, well, that's going to cost you X amount of money. But for half that price, I can see these puppets that I built, I can make something very similar to those shapes and be able to make it much cheaper for you, okay, at like half the price. And depending on the needs of the project, sometimes they don't need that. If you're designing a brand new mascot for this new company, they probably want it a very specific way. But if it's like an episode, like, we need a puppet for this, you know, and I wanted to, you know, have a big chin, and I wanted to have, you know, one big unibrow. You can just say, you know, like, I've got a puppet here. It can look like that, and I can just throw a big unibrow, whatever. So you get kind of ebb and flow. And as far as the patterns, you know, I have in the past had a company that wanted to also have me build them the puppet and send them the patterns. Now, that's a whole nother cost, too, because at that point, you're kind of putting yourself out of business for them in the future, because you're giving them your IP, your intellectual property that you created. So, like, the sculpture the puppet as a sculpture, as an object, is for sale. But now your methods for creating that is a whole nother. You know, it's essentially like a college education. You know, it's like it took a lot of time to develop those skills and to just the time to do it. Okay, and then at that point, you know, again, that's at a whole nother price point that you have to negotiate with. You know, with these people. One thing that I don't recommend at all is just selling puppets. I don't think selling puppets is a good way to go about it. Is what you really want to do is find a client who wants a puppet, okay? If you build a puppet and try to sell it, nobody wants to buy a puppet, okay? Nobody wants to buy a puppet, generally. I don't think, at least not for prices that you might be looking for, okay? What I would definitely say is try to find commission work. You'll find much more financial reward, economic reward from having a client, negotiating, knowing what you're getting up front, and then executing that puppet for the client. Because then maybe you make a whole bunch of puppets. Maybe you make 5 puppets, but only 2 of them sell. Now you got 3 puppets. What are you going to do with 3 puppets? What are you going to do with 3 puppets? You're not going to do anything with 3 puppets, okay? So that way you can control your inventory too. Because sometimes you see people who have like 50 puppets that they're trying to sell at something, and then they're trying to do deals to get it out. And, you know, less is more. You know, it's supply and demand. Because if you have 10 puppets for sale, and then they're asking like why different prices are, or what's something, you trust me, you want to do commissions. And you won't regret it. I don't believe in selling puppets. Puppets don't sell. Nobody wants to buy a puppet. And again, I think I said this in a forum not too long ago, or forum, right? What year is this? On someone's thing, commented it on someone's post somewhere, is that you know, a good evidence that puppets don't sell is like going to any toy store. Ask them what their stuffed animal sales are versus their puppet sales, and you'll cry, because people buy stuffed animals, but they don't buy puppets. You know, and I kind of cringe a little bit using the toy example, because puppets are not toys, at least the way that we use them and talk about them. They are a tool. They are a tool, but which is also why I would get away from just having a stock of puppets and trying to sell it, because I think that devalues your work. And I would you will be so much happier and more sane by just building puppets for commission. You know what? Let me talk about this. This is great. Okay. Going back to what I talked about in the beginning about overvaluing your work. You don't want to do that, because especially if you overvalue it, and even if you get a buyer for it, you tell someone, I'm going to make this puppet, it costs this much money, and you oversold yourself. And then you deliver it, and then they get it, and then they're just like, oh, you know, I thought it would be nicer. I thought it's just not as finished as I would hope it to be. It's not as, you know, I can see a little glue here, or I can, you know, see. You don't want that. You do not want that. You do not want to overprice yourself, okay? And again, a good way to check that over the years is, like I said, that sniff test, that eBay test. Because again, you know, when you're starting off, you're not going to be able to charge a lot. You know, I remember I had trouble selling a puppet for, you know, $50 when I started, you know, and unfortunately, sometimes you do have to start there. Okay. But here's the thing. Let's say then you get a lot of people. You know, this is what I wanted to talk about, is how to like raise your prices. It's based on supply and demand. Okay. In a big way it is, you know. Again, that's why you don't want to have a stock of puppets. If you have 10 puppets, you have a big supply and you're trying to sell them. So then naturally they'll have to sell cheaper. If you bill for commissions, you know, you can charge much, much more. So let's say you start off, you're selling puppets for $50 a puppet, okay? and then you sell a puppet. Great. You start working. Someone else says, hey, can you make me a puppet for $50? Sure, you make one for $50. Then all of a sudden, you got 20 people asking you for a puppet for $50. Okay, whoa, the demand is high. You know what? That's too much work. Let me charge a little more. Okay, let's say I go to $75 a puppet. Okay, now I have less people that because they wanted a puppet for $50. Now it's $75. So some people trickled off, but some of them stayed. But you know what? I'd rather make 3 puppets for $75 each than 4 puppets for $50 each. Because you know what? It's less work and more money. Okay? And then you're selling for $75. And people are like, wow, look, he's getting even better. He's getting even better. These puppets look great. Okay? And then after a while, now you have a long line again for $75 puppets. It's like, whoa, that line is going to take too long. Let me raise it. You know what? That line's too long. I got to put an even bigger number on it. I'm going to go to 150. I'm going to double it. Now, one thing is you don't want to go jump too fast, too high, because then it'll fall off too. So let's say you go to 150, everyone's gone. Uh-oh, I've outpriced myself. Let me go back. I'm gonna go to 100. Okay. Some people, half the people came back. I can do that. So you build those 100 puppets, $100 puppets for those people, and that's how you need to grow. You need to grow your price slowly. And this is generally speaking, because again, this is within each of those industries. You have to price it, whether it's theater, film, commercial, all those things. But make sure you gradually raise your price based on demand. Okay, again, if you have hundreds of people asking you for a puppet, you're not charging enough. Okay, and if you have nobody asking you for a puppet, you're charging too much. Okay, so those are things to keep in mind. Guys, this was great. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you got some value out of this. And I will see you guys later.